So we're all here because we're going through a crisis which is unprecedented in recent times. It's worldwide. So the last crisis that was worldwide like this that I can think of was the Second World War, because the scale, the scope, the speed at which the crisis has spread across the world, I don't think anything else matches. Not the financial crisis in 2007-8 or recessions before that, or the oil shock. All of these were crises which were limited. And the reason for that is very simple. The scale of the economy, the scale of globalization, which has happened in the last 15, 20 years, is immense. And the speed at which infections spread is much faster today than earlier. So I think we all know that this has happened, and we're all kind of, trying to figure a way out of this mess if we can figure out. I think one lesson is very clear, that we need to do it together. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar, because there are, the damage that is being done right now is not just to one part of the industry or one kind of a company or one sort of economic segment. It's to everybody. And I think that makes it even more imperative that all of us put our heads together to think about what the solutions could be. So obviously, we've got on the panel a fairly diverse set of experiences. Let me start, not quite in order, but let me start with Gaurav. Gaurav Mahajan is President Retail at Raymond, and he brings in more than 20 years of experience, 25 years of experience, Gaurav, in the industry. Mainly on the domestic market, in the Indian market. Pallab, on the other hand, Pallab Banerjee is currently with Pearl Global. Pallab has worked again since the early 90s, but more on the international markets in terms of product development, sourcing across different countries. And Pallab can talk a little bit about his experience as well. Jyoti Saikia is a very senior industry person. She's managing director of Freiberg, which works with some of the largest retailers and brands in the world. And she's been in the industry for decades as well. And I think Jyoti's seen more highs and lows in the industry than any other people have. And she continues to be very active in the industry. So she'll be able to share her perspectives a little later in the conversation about how international businesses are reacting and responding, and what the implications are for the businesses on the other side. Narendra Kumar is well-known, one of India's best-known designers. Narendra is also the creative director of fashion at Amazon in India. And again, Nari's brought a whole lot of experience, not just design and product development, but he's a fairly creative person in other aspects as well. So he's again got a much more wider perspective on product development and what it means for the industry. These are the four panelists that we have. We may bring in one other person depending on time and how the flow is. May I just request Diane, if you can just switch off your video, if you don't mind. If you can find a setting to stop video from your side, that would be great. Thank you. So let me start with Gaurav. I think Gaurav, retail is where it all stops, where the buck stops and the bucks start getting made as well, I guess, for the entire industry, where the consumer walks in and meets the product. How are you seeing the industry, and what has happened, before this crisis came to a head, and what's happening now?
Well, Didi and the rest of the NIFTA community, I think obviously I'll state the obvious if I say that what's happening right now is absolutely unprecedented. Not only is it something that hasn't happened before, I think it's also something that none of us probably ever imagined could happen, except I guess some people in Hollywood. Those guys can imagine everything. But I think most industry people are taking the entire industry. I think not only our industry, but the world as a whole has been taken completely by surprise, completely unprepared. As far as our retail industry is concerned, specifically in India, it's very obvious. You all know it's a complete shutdown. And we, it is also quite obvious that the shutdown is not going away in a hurry. And even as the lockdown shutdown opens up, one does not anticipate resumption of normal business for a longish period. So the estimates in the industry are that the lockdown will continue, or a full to a almost full lockdown will continue to end April to somewhere in mid-May, and normalcy in business will not come back till about 8 to 9 months. Now, the critical implication of that is cash. Business shuts down, stores are closed, there's no cash flowing in. It is a question of survival. And frankly, I know one of the briefings was not to really sound like the prophet of doom, but there is enough doom and gloom that's anyways been spread. The fact is that for many businesses, it will be a question of survival. For every business, it will be a question of survival. There will be businesses, I'm afraid, which will not be able to survive this onslaught, this particular situation. Again, industry estimates that almost about 15 to 20% businesses are staring at a complete closure. The balanced businesses, which manage to actually avoid closure, will invariably shrink. I think survival will demand that businesses focus on their core. Businesses will have to downsize. Stocks will have to come down, expenses will have to come down, expansion and growth will have to, for the time being, take a backseat. So I think, if I break down what's happening right now is frankly obvious to everybody, but I think the immediate impact of that, as the medical aspect of this and the social aspect of this pandemic, stabilizes, is the economic aftermath is going to be quite painful. Businesses are either going to shut down and shrink, and I think the most obvious and the most visible impact is going to be on jobs and earnings. So and that is, I think, critical, because the retail industry as a whole employs almost about 40 to 50 million people. So you can imagine the impact. Even if you take the organized retail, what we see around us more directly, that's about 6 million people. Again, the estimations are that about 20 to 25% jobs are going to disappear. So the sheer number of immediate job losses, of the jobs that will remain, earnings are likely to fall. And I think those are some of the very immediate and obvious impacts. I think how much of this pans out and how much of this we are able to avoid, a large part will also be dependent on the fiscal intervention by the government. The government, we all must acknowledge, has been absolutely stellar in terms of how they have responded to the epidemic, in terms of the sheer logistics and the health aspect of the epidemic. And I think we are almost all positively surprised by the Indian administrative machinery and what it's managed to achieve and is continuing to do. The jury is still out. There is still a lot to do, but I think they've done a stellar job on the government package front. And I think this is the most critical piece. The fiscal package that the government offers, if it does not, businesses are not in a position, even large businesses are not in a position to sustain and bear the brunt of the lockdown. And fiscal relief is something that I think the government has still been very slow on. Total relief package offered up till now is about 1% of GDP. Across the world, most governments, while they have not been as good on the health and social aspect, they've been very prompt on the fiscal aspect, and they range from anywhere between 6 to 9%. Japan recently announced a $1 trillion package, which is 20% of GDP. And I think most governments are realizing that unless they intervene, they will not be able to contain the aftermath of this epidemic. And I think the government needs to intervene. That is the only way in the short term, many of the businesses are going to survive. And even those that survive are going to manage to be in a position where they can survive in the long term. So it's bleak, I'm afraid. It's bleak.
Yeah. So I just want to pick up on something which you said about the loss, the job loss, obviously. If there are, on the business side, let's say, if 10 to 15 to 20% businesses shut down, and if you say in retail, let's say between 40 and 50 million people are employed, and there could be a shrinkage of as much as, again, 20% or thereabouts. That's literally tens of millions of jobs
Yes.
going down. That's a good-sized economy anywhere, good-sized country population anywhere.
Yes.
And these are, I mean, apart from the human aspect in terms of just people losing their livelihood, these are
Yes.
also for the economy, consumers,
Yes.
actually contribute back into the retail business. And
Yeah.
if they don't have earnings, they are not going to be spending on what you're trying to sell them.
Absolutely.
So I think that kind of brings us to a very vicious downward spiral,
Yeah.
which we need to do everything to avoid as much as possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think even for people who maintain their jobs, and there is going to be a new normal. I don't want to talk about, so right now the focus is on the conversation. The focus of the conversation is on what's happening immediately. So I think there is a short-term 6 to 9 month, especially in the next 3 months, how people are going to survive. I think in the long term, I think this is also a time while, businesses, individuals figure out survival in the short term. I think it's also the time to figure out how to prepare oneself for the new normal. It is going new normal, of course, in terms of a lower consumption, many people out of jobs. There is also a sentiment impact of a lot of people being out of jobs, right? Economy is not driven only by hard, absolute, tangible cash. It's also driven by sentiment. And the lasting impact on sentiment is also something which sustains for some time. And I think that's also going to have an impact. And while I'm doing this doom and gloom, I do believe that there are lots of opportunities. There's also much, but we could probably talk about that a little further into this conversation.
Absolutely.
But I think short-term government intervention is absolutely critical. Absolutely critical.
Sure. So I think we do want to come back to the opportunities, but before we do that, I'd like to go to Pallab. Pallab, your business actually is a major supplier partner to some of the largest retailers and brands in the world. What are you seeing? What have you been seeing over the last 3 months, 4 months from that side, from Europe, from the US, and so on?
If I look at the international retailer till about February, everything was quite normal. The only thing that the concern that we had was what's happening to the supply chain in China. And then comes March and things changed so drastically. As you said, like it happened very fast and very quickly. Most of the US retailers, they realized by about 10th of March that customers are not coming in or walking into the stores. And then they started closing down the stores. And if I take 1 minute and show something to you, this is a selection of some of the biggest retailers that's there in US. If you talk of Kohl's, Gap, Target, Macy's, H&M. Now, if you look at it, what they do, like all these retailers, they have a thing that their top line revenue is this, and what is the percentage of goods that they buy. So from the revenue, almost 38%, which is like for a wholesale brand like Ralph Lauren, or to the retailers, if you look at it, 60% of the cost, approximately between 16 or like high 50s to 60% of the cost goes, of the revenue goes for buying of the goods. So naturally, if the stores are closed, then they won't be buying these goods. What they would be doing with that merchandise. So that's a big problem for them. And the second part is this SG&A expense. The kind of expenditure, 45% of their revenue, or let's say about 30% of the revenue for the retailers. Like these are, I would say, the Kohl's, Gap, Target, Macy's, these are retailers. If you can see that almost 30% of the revenue goes into the managing their SG&A cost. So now these are the two big things that most of us have to understand. As soon as the stores get closed, they wanted to get rid of the inventory. That means the inventory that is going to come into their warehouse. They immediately stop that. For example, if I take, let's assume a company which has got $12 billion of sales annually. That means $1 billion worth of goods it's selling every month. Out of that 1 billion, 600 million goes for the merchandise that it buy, and 300 million goes for the overhead, that means advertisement, the advertising that they do, or the stores that they maintain, or basically everything else about their salary, wages, travel, everything. So now these two component is getting impacted as soon as the revenue is not coming. So they had to get out of the outflow of their cash. So immediately what they did, most of these big retailers, they said that please hold on to all the good production that you are happening, or whatever you're going to ship, don't ship it. That's the first reaction most of these international retailers did. The second thing that they did was they are not paying. What happened, whatever goods that they received in the month of January or February, let's say, that revenue would have come to them in the month of March. So let's say out of $1 billion, 600 million has to go to this supply chain. That means the goods, whatever goods are coming in, they have to pay those suppliers. So they said that, okay, we don't have the money that is coming in. So immediately they stopped supplying those, paying those dues that was there from February onwards. So this is the first impact that happened. And then they are talking about what happened in America or in Europe. Most of these people have got the advantage of furlough, like which is a term that is used that if they lose the job, so they are immediately out of job. The employees, let's say all the store employees, they have been furloughed. That means the retailer won't be paying them. The government will be paying them. So this is what has happened in US. Almost on 1st of April, 6.6 million people were going into the government, pay packages compared to the payment that they're getting from these retailers. These are the big two steps that has happened. The chain reaction is that as a manufacturer across the globe, nothing to do with India specifically, but India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam, all the manufacturing countries, or China, the suppliers or the manufacturers, they didn't get paid for the goods that they shipped in February, let's say. The payment that was about to be due, most of the retailers said, okay, I can't pay it because my revenue is not coming. So change the payment term from a 30 or 45 days immediately to 100 day or 150 days. Some of the retailers are talking about 150 days. That means the payment is going to now come after almost like 5.5 months back later. So this is the immediate two impact that is happening, as Gaurav explained just now. Like if the cash is not there, then naturally it will impact every section of the business. So that is what we are going through. That's the disturbance that has happened suddenly it happened in the month of March end to April beginning as we're going into. So everybody is going through this phase at this point of time where they are saying, oh my God, what happened? The cash is not coming. The retailers are saying, I don't have the cash to pay you immediately. The vendors are saying, okay, what should we do? So this is what we are figuring out.
Right.
Let me pause there, and if it makes sense to all of us.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's a good point if, Jyoti, would you mind stepping in and also talk about your customers and how they've been perceiving how the business is going?
I couldn't have said it better than Gaurav and Pallav, because they have laid out for you and for all of us the background as well as whatever is going on today. Pallav has laid it out very well. I don't think anybody is going to hear anything different from what he said. The only thing that I would bring into the mix is the fact that we really do not know when exactly the stores are going to open.
Mm-hmm.
It's still, a question out there. We don't know how this virus is going to behave over the next few weeks. And most organizations, regardless whether they're Indian retailers or customers overseas, will only be able to pay if their revenues are coming in. So revenue crunch and cash crunch, these are the two big issues that we all have to deal with. I really don't have anything new to add to what has already been said.
So, I think, Nari, I'd like to come to you. I have a hypothesis which I'd just like to put out there, and maybe if you could react to it. The way the whole value chain has got structured over the last few decades is that because of lower costs, retailers and brands have gone further afield. Some of it was political to support economies that needed supporting in the 1950s, 60s, and so on. So the whole Asian growth was fueled almost by the textile and apparel industry. We've got to a situation where you've got a few countries, China definitely notably there, with a very large share of that supply chain. But the distance and the structure has also created a calendar, a sourcing calendar, a product development calendar, which is several months long. So it reduces responsiveness. It adds bulk somewhere in the middle, which you can't really get rid of. Are we really, as an industry, from a design and product development perspective, are we geared to handling any such event? I mean, let alone something of this scale.
So thank you, Gaurav. Sorry, Devanshu. The thing is,
You're welcome, Nari.
Good points put forward by all three of them before this. But the thing is, it depends on the kind of business model that you have, and that business model has evolved over a period of time. If you saw the early 90s, it was brands like, Paxson, American Apparel, A&F that were doing really quite well. Had a business model that had a long endurance period of 6 months to a year, a seasonal business kind of plan they had, even though a lot of their products were sort of basics and that were sort of basics that could be year round, could be used, except that they were winter and summer. The model changed to something like Zara in the 90s, when it came toward more reactive to what was happening in the market at that point, and how quick they could bring product into the market, and so smaller production bases were close to home to the market that they were really selling in, but the larger seasonal product was coming in from China, where they had more lead time to produce that kind of stuff. What has happened post that, and especially given the fact that over the last year or two, environment and social issues have come to the forefront, and especially the fact that today the market size of the Gen Z is about 40% of the global market, and their values are completely different from what fast fashion was about. I think that, we've come to a point where we're looking at now brands like, if you've seen brands like Everlane, which are digital first brands that have come into place, that do not need large inventories, but are working on basics that could support a big consumer base kind of stuff. And building value around that really is what is changing. The thing is, all of these brands, also the brands that were there, built there, for instance, if you look at India, the brands that were built in India were built in the 80s and 90s, where 70s and 80s, whether it was Raymond, Levi's, Van Heusen, Louis Philippe, and all that kind of stuff. The consumer has changed completely. There is a new market, and the younger consumer, the millennial and millennial one, who is green aware, wants some kind of understanding and responsibility to the product coming in, and the Gen Z, which has tied in social issues into this mix. So the whole mix has changed completely for the process itself. And this mix sometimes comes from the fact that closer to market is better going ahead, because you want to sustain your family, your group, your country, your market first before you do that. And you saw it yesterday when one of the the American Navarro, the foreign trade advisor for the US, said that we should be manufacturing these basic stuff in the US and not doing it outside. So people's vision is going to change about how business is going to be done. The model also will probably evolve, from digital first to sustainability to and the whole idea of fast fashion will be shaken quite deeply. So building how we are going to be responsive to this really depends on how the model is going to change, given the environmental impact, given the kind of awareness that is there, given the kind of size of this new market that is dictating fashion that's happening, which you call, like people, you call this as the TikTok generation. They are huge people, much bigger followings than even, our superstar cricketers and all of that kind of stuff. But and their fashion. Having said that, India and outside are two different stages of evolution. In India, it will still take some time before sustainability becomes an important issue. Social issues become a little bigger issue because our market size is too vast and still not latched on to the idea of environment being an important thing when you're first really trying hard to get food on your table.
So I think Nari made a couple of points there, and I'd just like to maybe bring in Gaurav to respond on those. And between the two of you, you can handle it.
Sure. No, I think what Nari is sort of segueing into, Didi, is the new normal, and I think it's very important because look, the doom and gloom is not something that we can wish away, and we have to sort of work to survive in the short term. But I think, frankly, obviously, the sun will shine again, but it'll be a different sun and it'll shine on a different world. And I think what's also important is while we survive in the current situation, the smart thing to do would be to prepare for that new world. And I think some of the and these are again thoughts. Look, disclaimer. None of us, or for that matter, all the consultants and the pundits never imagined or predicted that something like this would happen. So how can we actually, with any kind of confidence, predict what's going to happen? But we can only sort of, have conjectures and some hypotheses.
Gaurav, I'd just like to interrupt you there. Exactly a year ago, I had posed this hypothesis at the NIFTA conclave.
I remember that.
Last year.
I remember that.
If your business were to drop to half in a matter of 10 years and maybe less, I'd said, and you still had to run a profitable business, what would you do? I didn't know that this COVID virus was going to hit.
Yeah, but I think you had some premonition, really, and you didn't tell us. Damn you! Just kidding.
Third eye.
Yeah, third eyesight. Absolutely. No, I think
the point that Nari made was, there is while there is a maybe lack of orientation towards the overt sustainability kind of a messaging, there is, I think, a common feature, which is if I have insecurity about my income, about my future, it's a sentiment which drives, as you said, Gaurav.
Yeah.
A sentiment actually drives a lot of the spending. It's not only the amount of cash that you have.
Very true.
How do we as an industry respond to that? I think that will be very important.
Look, as I said earlier, it's a survival battle in the short term. And invariably what's going to happen is that everybody is going to shrink. I think that'll be the sort of the reflex reaction of every organization. It's almost like the animal instinct of how do you survive. And I can guarantee you that every single organization at this point in time is doing exactly this exercise of looking at their cash flows, looking at projecting how business is going to be going forward. It's not going to be the same size in the next 6 to 9 months. There's going to be a massive, again, industry estimates are that, for this financial year, and this has hit us just precisely at the beginning of the financial year, that for this financial year, business size is going to shrink by about anywhere between 30 to 40, some predict even 50%. And as I said, who knows? But the fact is it's going to shrink significantly. At that level of top line, costs are just not sustainable. So reflex reaction, cut. Nobody has cash. Nobody wants to pay anybody. Yeah. But more importantly, that's still short term. The intention is that, you come around and the cash flow starts circulating again. But there is going to be a massive cost cut. Businesses are going to look at their core. They're going to focus on their core. They're going to throw out any expansion, growth, anything that was fancy and anything that was, oriented towards long-term projections is going to be out of the window. And every business is going to look down to trimming it down to a size where it can survive this. Now that, and we can keep on talking about the doom and gloom. But I think where the opportunity, and I'm going to focus on the new normal. What Nari hinted was what kind of a world will the sun shine on again? And I think one of the things that's going to happen, and this is for all our friends, colleagues, industry members out there, I think invariably in the short term, there is going to be extreme focus on value from consumers. There is going to be extreme focus on cash by businesses. And people are going to be frugal in what they offer, and businesses are going to be frugal in what they offer, and consumers are going to be very frugal in what they pick up. But I think as the situation normalizes, we will also find a scenario. This is now my projection. This is what I think will happen. That there will be an army of survivors, or there will be a large majority of surviving businesses who will all be very lean, very cash oriented, but also very, very limited in terms of what they offer. And I think as the market starts opening up, as normalcy starts to return, there is going to be, in my opinion, an opportunity for differentiated, value-added, innovation-based propositions. So for anybody in this market, I think, who, so my advice would be, for whoever cares out there, is that if you can somehow manage to survive through this, but hold on to your ability to innovate or build capabilities through this adversity. Because the fact is, go down historically, adversities of this magnitude have always thrown up some of the most amazing opportunities as well. Some of the biggest success stories have actually taken birth in adversities of this nature. And I think if we focus on that, if members of our industry focus on that, focus on different, looking at differentiated, because there is going to come a time when suddenly everybody is going to be looking very similar. They're going to have very small businesses, very tight, very frugal. And then people are going to be saying, when the market turns to normal, where is the innovation? Where is the niche? Where is the differentiation? And there could be an opportunity for a lot of people to, build that and be ready with that kind of capability when normalcy returns. Now, it's easier said than done. But I think that definitely is an opportunity. Three other things I want to quickly just add. One, another new normal I foresee is that technology is going to play a much more critical role in life and in business. Yeah, physical contact is not going to be the same thing ever again. And people forget. So let's not assume that forever now people are scarred. But there is going to be a shift in people's attitude. So technology, online, experiential. Touch screens, buying without physical, proximity is something that's the second trend that I foresee. The third trend that the third trend that I foresee is what Nari was talking about. I think this pandemic and this crisis is touching people not just at a sort of a tangible level, but also at an emotional level. I think a lot of people in this crisis, out of the fear and the anxiety and of having been locked down and having to economize and live with less, are suddenly realizing the value of living with less. I think the sense of purpose, conscious living, conscious consumption, it was something that was on the horizon. Even technology for that matter. Both these trends were something which were on the horizon, and we were saying that it over a period of time, slow fashion, as some people like to say, more purposeful business with purpose, business with a conscience, were things on the horizon. I think we will accelerate very fast towards those trends. So technology and purpose, stroke conscious businesses, I think that's the third trend. And I think the fourth one, which also we cannot discount and which is going to come through, is the disproportionate focus on safety, hygiene, and health. And I think that's again, I see that as an opportunity. Again, for people who are wanting to turn their head away from the doom and gloom and look at the light at the end of the tunnel. I think these are some of the important trends to focus on, in my opinion, and start preparing for.
So to add to what Gaurav said just now, really, the thing is the opportunities are immense that would come out of this at some point. Once the initial phase, we can weather the initial phase that's going through this kind of stuff. Like, it's looking at the market and saying basics and essentials are going to be important going ahead, and people are going to work on something like that. People are going to learn a new kind of style where they learn to put one piece of clothing together in 5 different ways to make it more versatile, which will make them more fashion aware, or individually kind of stuff. But, technology definitely will play a big role in how we are going to shop and what we are going to do. And a lot of that design today is information that we are getting in. Companies getting information using digital analytics to do all of that. A lot of design is driven just by what is already selling in the store. So the idea of innovation, the opportunity for innovation really is the fact that we have 40% of our country below 21, 22 or 30 years old. We have a big market out there. The brands that were created in these countries are all more than 30 years old. There are no new brands. The opportunity really is, if I was to ask someone, tell me a brand that is aimed at a 20-year-old, a new brand that has value for a 20-year-old, not one in this country that you can talk of. There are legacy brands that have been there, UCB and Levi's and stuff like that, but there are no new brands, and there's a huge market around there. So there are opportunities also, but I guess weathering this part is really the most crucial and important, and how you come out of it is really what will decide where you go next.
I'd like to just focus on a couple of things, and then there are a whole host of questions. With your permission, we may go over about 10 minutes if you don't mind, because I think there's a lot of important stuff that people have asked. One point is about the contrasting styles in which countries have responded to the crisis, at least on the supply side. And Jyoti and Pallab, if you can just kind of step in on this. Let's say India versus China or Bangladesh or other countries, how have they responded at the industry level, at the government level? And do you see gaps or lacuna in India which we need to fill very quickly?
So I'll take that question first. China, I think, is now a different story. China is coming out of the crisis, and they are coming into a more normal period. So I would think that we look at China differently. The government has provided a great deal of stimulus and aid. So I think that is one.
I think we're losing her.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think Jyoti.
Side. However, as we go to the future, can you hear me?
Sorry. Yeah,
No,
Jyoti,
no.
now we can hear
No.
you. I think you'd gone completely off. Now we can hear you.
Okay. Well, I am in a very remote location,
Sure.
and thanks to iPhone, I can still communicate. So what I was saying was China is a slightly different story. They are ahead of the curve in terms of recovery mode. Bangladesh has its own problems to deal with. They have a very cohesive approach, I would say, and I think that's an important point, a very cohesive industry approach to trying to solve problems. I think where we could do better is, first of all, articulate our needs to the government in a very simple way and a cohesive way. We have a very fractured manufacturing supply chain situation with a lot of different agencies which are doing a great job representing the folks that they represent. But this problem now touches everyone. It's not just the vendor who exports or the retailer. You have the same problem with weavers, spinners, process houses, trim suppliers. Everybody is wrapped up in the problem. So when I look at the Indian context, I'm looking at the fact that we have a much larger population that needs to be safeguarded against hunger, poverty, and that becomes a very big problem for both the industry and the government to resolve. Unless that is dealt with first and we look at credit availability for companies to stay afloat, we do have a problem that could be a little bit more difficult to solve. But on the brighter side, we do have a very young, and I'm going to quote Nari here, a young and very innovative population. We have the ability to actually live through more difficult times than perhaps a lot of others do. So I would think that we should look at inwards, see what we can do for ourselves here. Technology definitely is one of the ways forward. But on the whole, I think here is now a time where, and I was mentioning this earlier today when we were having a private conversation, we don't have a NASSCOM type organization that represents everybody in the industry and can come together, collaborate to solve problems. So if there's any ask I have of people across, including us, all of us need to come together and talk as one voice to find these solutions. While I say this, do I have practical steps go forward? No, but this is one good step you have taken today to start this conversation, and we can all, sign on to becoming partners in taking ourselves forward. One other thing I'll touch on that Nari pointed out, which is localization of markets, manufacturing within the market. We again have an advantage there. So instead of just looking at the current problems, we need to start looking at the future and say, how can India find its own solutions going forward? That would be really what I would like to see happening over the next few weeks after we have got past making arrangements for survival.
Absolutely not. I think very good point. To your point about speaking with one voice, I think the whole attempt that NIFTA is making today, and at the outset, as I said, NIFTA comprises of people who are across the value chain. So we hope to be able to represent all voices and bring together people around one table so that we can actually, when we are speaking to the government also for support, uh, there are some very, very cohesive suggestions being given rather than piecemeal. And I hope that over the next few days we can, sit with the government and kind of try and work out immediate solutions. I think a very big concern, given the mix of people on this call, is about employment. And I think Gaurav at the outset also mentioned about potential closures and job losses and so on. So there is, I think, this concern that everybody would have, whether they are already employed in the industry or whether they are students who are going to be graduating and joining. What do we need to do, to come out of this crisis, to handle ourselves best as employees? I mean, a lot of people are business owners, but a lot of them are not. So as an employee, I don't have control over my job, but I do have control over what I do and my skill set and so on. So do you see things which people should be doing at this point of time in terms of skills, attitude, attributes, whatever you want to speak about?
I think sorry, carry on.
I mean,
Pallab.
go ahead.
No, I think one critical, sorry, Pallab, sorry.
Pallab, why don't you go?
No, definitely post-COVID, there would be a lot of changes. I think some of the viewers have already raised the question of how the behavior changes that will happen in the consumers. So both at the consumers, at the workplace, at every level, I think we will see a whole lot of changes. For example, working from home has become such a norm now. And in India, we call it that if we do something for 21 days, it becomes a habit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think so many consumers in US or in European countries are now doing everything from their home. So naturally, there are behaviors change. Like when I speak to my contacts in New York almost every day, they are so comfortable with the new norms. That means ordering everything on phone and then going and picking it up, or basically online, the mobile. So that thing of e-commerce has definitely also is evolving. It's not that simple e-commerce that we knew earlier and what the e-commerce would be. Similarly, like, in terms of working, the way that we used to work earlier and the way that now we're going to work will be very different. In our industry, I think that digital platform of that, digital approvals is definitely going to be very, very important. All the retailers who were like toying with it, or the manufacturers who were just thinking of it like whether we should invest or not, or somebody was using it only for marketing purpose, now the people will really go for it. Some of the retailers who have already evolved in that direction, they are making the best use of it today. That means all of their approvals are already happening on digital platform in this last 15 or 20 days that I have seen. So those kind of changes of behavior, both at workplace as well as at the consumer's end, is going to happen. There's no two way about it.
So I'm going to ask the same question, but in a different way to Nari.
Yeah.
If you were to be, and you are, I think at this point of time, we are all talking to students as well who are going to be graduating in a few months. What would you tell them? What do they need to do?
So I think the important thing is draw on their past experience to say that they have gone on to where they are today and they have faced difficulties in life before, and this is another one of those that will come up. Not to lose hope, but also to look at innovations, look at new areas that are there, that are available today for the whole lot of young consumers. How to be collaborative within teams, how to work with other people together. I think this is a great time for collaborations and people coming together to put up stuff like, a collective of people, students getting together to set up something by themselves, where the costs are distributed and yet you can get in the kind of traffic, all of that kind of stuff. It's an opportunity. It's a moment of great opportunity. One, because the consumer sentiment has changed, and the fact that the new consumer values have changed completely. The value that they have grown up with, they're in a position to talk to the new thing. Otherwise, earlier they would have just come into a market that were dealing with the value of an older generation and an older company thinking in an old way. And the opportunity to innovate, I think, is tremendous today. And I think that the more tighter your inspiration is, or the field of work you have, the better you can dive deeper into what you can do and come out with something really specific and solid, you know. And for me, this is a moment of opportunity. All we need is to have an open eye, open mind, and the awareness about how the consumer is changing, you know. So we have to be able to deal with them, to be able to talk to them in their language. A simple example, you know, the world over street fashion is so big. In India, it's still catching on. It's still to catch on in some point. It will blow up given the fact that most of our consumer is below 21 and at 26, 28 kind of stuff. So opportunities are tremendous, you know, but we have to keep in mind value, keep in mind the idea of sustainability, and find out how we can tie in these kind of social issues into design. So there'll be a new way of thinking of design. And if you have an open mind and an understanding, the opportunities are tremendous.
Gaurav, let me come to you. I think, you know, there are also people who are maybe a few years into the industry who are also concerned about job losses. You know, they've kind of worked in organizations, maybe one or two organizations, and they're concerned that they're going to be losing their job in the next few months. Companies have already started tightening. What should we do?
I think, so, you know, whether it's students or whether it's people in the industry, my first, you know, one single thing that we all need to do, first of all, and we need to come to terms with reality, and we need to manage our expectations. This is not going to be easy in the short term. Jobs are going to be lost. There is going to be less cash in hand. There are going to be restrictions in terms of what we can do, and we have to accept that. And I think, you know, I am a firm believer in the fact that, you know, when you manage your expectations, you are able to get through. You know, this is not immediately. I'm talking about the, you know, the next 3 to 6 months. A lot of people have to come to terms with pain. And if you are anticipating it, if you're preparing for it, and if you are, you know, setting the ground for it, you know, you can get through it. So there is, I don't want to mince words there. There is no way to mollycoddle this. There is no softer way of saying it. And one has to say that, how can I live with less? How can I cut down my expenses? It's just exactly how businesses are going to do. You know, individuals also will have to say, hey, I need to cut down my expenses. Do I need to spend so much? For some time, I need to tighten my belt. And, you know, so that's part one of the game, which is survive. So I call it the survive and thrive. I just made that up, by the way. So the survive and thrive approach. In the short term, you have to survive. There is no other way of surviving but coming to terms with reality and, you know, accepting it and managing it in the short term. The thrive part is about, as I said earlier, prepare for the future. And I think what people in the industry, youngsters, or, you know, people who are about to enter the industry have to see, the thrive mode is really about being extremely flexible. You know, you have to multitask. You have to have the ability to multi-skill yourself and multitask. And gone are the days when, you know, so conventional jobs will be less and less. People who can apply themselves in unconventional ways to conventional situations are the ones who will find the opportunity to thrive. I think, you know, if you are a designer, then how can you be, and as I said, technology is another trend. So anybody, in my opinion, who is unfamiliar with technology or is uncomfortable with technology, or let me put it in a positive way, my wife tells me I sometimes speak too negatively. Let me try to put a positive, you know, angle on this. Is that people who you know, embrace technology, people who have the ability to very quickly change with changing technology and accept it, are people who are going to definitely find an opportunity to thrive. So I would say, manage your expectations in the short term. This is real. This, you can't wish it away. Live with it, bear it. You know, hold your breath, tighten your belt, whatever it takes, live through it and get through it. Don't, and I say that also because one of the biggest things here is going to be the emotional impact. There is a human problem coming.
Absolutely.
Most people in my generation and younger have not seen public adversity of this nature, you know, of the scale of which is going to hit us. So I think we have to brace ourselves for it, and I think we have to keep ourselves mentally, emotionally strong, and we have to remember that this is temporary. This will pass. This is real today, but this will pass. So manage expectations. One, prepare yourself for a new future. In the new future, learn to be extremely flexible, learn to be multi-scaled, and bring technology and familiarity and comfort with technology. Make it a part of your DNA. I think those are some of the things that come to mind right now. We are all quite numbed, so we are all frankly, thinking about more, how do I get my groceries today, right? So that's also something that's on my mind as I'm talking to you. So we're going back to basics. It's all about how do we put the real food on the table right now. So manage expectations, multi-scale yourself, and embrace technology. Those 3 points.
I think
that's just one thing to add. Most of the big companies have gone ahead with the pay cut.
Yeah.
All the big retailers of US, UK, Europe, everybody from CEO to up to the director levels, everybody either is gone without salary for the next 3 to 6 months or like a severe pay cut. Some of them has gone for full 1 year, the CEOs and all. Even in India also, the big organizations, we have already aligned to, forgo of salary for a couple of months and then take pay cuts and all. So that's the reality which is hitting us at this point of time.
Yes.
So yeah, those expectations has to be managed. But definitely it's a huge opportunity, as all of us are saying, and of course, like Nari cannot say anything better than Nari, is definitely like this is the time that innovation and other skills that we have to build in ourselves will take us forward. So every home today, I think people who have not done technology are like getting savvy in technology. People I'm talking about the older generation. And even similar to other people, like other businesses, like who are avoiding those expenses on innovation and research, are now putting that money into it. Whatever, and of course, now the resources are much more scarce. So now they're doing it. When they had the resource, I think some people didn't do it. Those kind of things will be there. Yes, automation will play a big role going forward. Those kind of things, because the speed will happen. As Nari just said, we have to be very close to the consumer. And if somebody is very close to the consumer, then definitely you need to have speed in every way. And for the big customers or big brands and all, automation will be an important thing. Some of the people are already asking us what kind of automated factory that you have so that you can speed up the process and we can do away with a lot of steps like quality checks and other things and all. How do you get better quality? How do you get more uniformity and also the speed? So the automation would play a role.
Great. We're running out of time, so I think it's both of you have actually made pretty much what sound like your closing remarks. I'll go to Nari for his closing thoughts, and then last to not the least to Jyoti, because everybody else on the panel is a NIFT alumnus and you're not. So the question I'm going to put to Jyoti last is, what do you think NIFTA should be doing at this stage? But before that, Nari, your closing remarks. What are your thoughts? Top 3 things.
Actually, the thing is, I think number one is we need to be first accepting of the situation. Like Gaurav said, I agree that we need to manage our expectations, but it should be an opportunity to innovate. It should be an opportunity, number 2, to innovate in the market. Number 3 is really to upskill yourself. Use this as an opportunity to upskill yourself in areas related to design. And like Gaurav said earlier, the future is about multitasking, and everything being interconnected today. You don't know where you will get your next inspiration from, or where will you get your next idea from, because everything is interrelated. Open mind, awareness. Those are the 3 things that I would really look at. They getting hold grip of the situation, being calm about it, looking at innovation, and upskilling yourself over the next 3 to 6 months at least.
So I just would like to add one thought, and before that, before I go to Jyoti, that all of us, I think, are extremely fortunate. We have the benefit of a lot of skills that we've already built, a lot of experience that we've already built, education, family support, and so on. There are lots of people in the industry, in the country, around the world, who don't have the same advantages. And at this point in time, I think it is important for us not only to think about ourselves, but also to think about others who may not have had the same advantages. So there is, workers who produce the product, who don't have the kind of skill or the kind of financial background to be able to go without wages, for instance, for even a few days, let alone a few weeks or a few months. And we should, I think, all of us should think about how we can support, again, those who can't support themselves. And I think we'll need to stand together even more so now than ever before. Keeping in mind the fact that there are plenty of people who are going to be in pain in a much more deeper manner than we could maybe going through it individually. So yeah, on that note, Jyoti, your thoughts, your closing remarks, sir. What do you think NIFTA should be doing at this stage?
So firstly, let me thank all the many NIFTians I've been very privileged to be associated with in the past couple of decades. And I don't think there is a better group, a more innovative group, and a more committed group that I have come across. So thank you all for having added great value to my professional life, and in many cases, my personal life as well. I have some deep friendships that have grown over these 2 decades or 3 decades. So looking ahead, I think you're actually perfectly positioned to be the innovators and new thinkers. One thing I do want to say, even looking at some of the questions that are coming up on the screen, we do have to think very differently. Thinking about businesses in the old manner, whether it's faster, slower, etc., is not enough. What's that out of the box thinking? And in my work life, I'm constantly trying to define what is out of the box. But it is a great time for innovation. And somebody is asking, is it a good time for startups? I would say could never be a better time for startups. This is when one needs to really think about how our skills could be used differently, not only in fashion. I think Gaurav is the one who mentioned hygiene, health, safety. All of these things become very important for design and for innovation. So my ask of NIFTA would be that continue this conversation, but also start segmenting off. There are younger people who are just coming into the industry who need a different type of guidance and helping hand. And then we have also to deal with the fact that we need a body that will influence companies to think differently, and also to speak to government in a language that incorporates everybody in the supply chain. So that would be my closing remark.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for the time that you spent, for the thoughts that you've shared. And as Jyoti, you said, we need to keep the conversation going, and I'm sure we will hold other webinars. There's been a whole host of questions, issues, points which have been raised in the chat, and while people registered. We'll try and structure specific conversations around those issues. But for this time, thank you all, for those of you who've signed in from around the world, different time zones. Thank you all for your participation. We look forward to keeping the conversation going, and more power to the network. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.